Hello, NDE narrator. My name is Arman. I am an Iranian-born American and a former U.S. Navy SEAL. I am currently sending this to you from Armenia, and the testimony of the Saudi Royal Guard who converted to Christianity has moved me to share my own story with you, because we had a similar encounter. I am 42 years old and I was born in Tehran, the capital of Iran. I spent my earliest years in a small apartment in the southern part of the city, where the narrow streets were always busy with vendors calling out their goods and children playing football until late in the evening. I was the only child of my parents, and my father worked in a small shop selling spare car parts while my mother stayed home. My father was a devout Muslim, and from as early as I could remember, he taught me the daily prayers, how to read the Quran in Farsi and Arabic, and the importance of obeying the rules of Islam. Our local imam knew my father well because my father was active in the mosque, always helping organize Friday prayers and religious events in the community. Growing up in Tehran during the years after the 1979 Islamic Revolution was difficult for many families, including ours. My father often spoke about how the revolution had changed life in Iran. He had seen friends lose their jobs, relatives flee to other countries, and the economy grow worse. Though my father believed in Islam, he also knew that the political leaders in power after the revolution made life hard for many ordinary Muslims. By the time I was 8 years old, my father had made a decision that would change my life forever. He wanted to leave Iran and take me to the United States. He told me it was for my safety and future, but I could see in his eyes that there was more to it. Later, I learned he feared for his life because of political tensions and threats from people connected to the regime. The process of leaving Iran was not easy. My father had to sell most of what we owned. He quietly said goodbye to friends he trusted and avoided talking to anyone who might report him to the authorities. I remember the night before we left Tehran. He sat with me and explained that we were going to a new place where people spoke English, where life was faster, and where I would have opportunities he could not give me in Iran. He made me promise that no matter where we lived, I would never forget I was a Muslim and that I must remain faithful to Allah. That night I prayed beside him, not fully understanding how far away from home we would soon be. A week later we left Tehran and flew first to Istanbul, then to New York, and finally to Los Angeles. Arriving in Los Angeles was overwhelming for me as a child. Everything felt so large, colorful, and noisy compared to Tehran. My father found a small apartment in an area where other Iranian immigrants lived, so I still heard Farsi being spoken on the streets and in shops. But life was not the same. My father worked long hours at an auto repair shop, and he pushed me to do well in school from the first day. He would often remind me that he had sacrificed everything to bring me to America. He said I had to be the first in my class, the best at sports, and the most disciplined in everything I did. At home, we still lived under the same strict Islamic rules we had in Iran. We prayed 5 times a day, fasted during Ramadan, and attended the mosque every Friday. Even though I was living in America, my father kept a tight grip on my life. He never wanted me to become too American, as he called it. I could not go to sleepovers or attend birthday parties unless they were with other Muslim families he trusted. If my grades dropped even slightly, he would sit me down and lecture me for hours about hard work, honor, and the duty I had to him, to our family, and to Allah. The imam at the mosque also played a big role in shaping my early years in the U.S. He often told me I was the future of the Iranian Muslim community in America and that I had to be a leader. Those words planted a seed in my mind. I began to believe I had to be the best at everything, no matter the cost. Balancing life between Iranian traditions and American culture was not easy. At school, I learned to speak English quickly and I made friends from different backgrounds. But at home, my father reminded me that I was Iranian first, Muslim second, and American last. Sometimes I felt like I was living in two worlds that didn't always fit together. My friends at school had more freedom while I lived under constant expectations. When other kids spent weekends playing video games or going to the movies, I spent mine memorizing Quranic verses, helping at the mosque, or working alongside my father in the shop. Looking back, I know my father believed he was protecting me from losing my identity, but as a child, it felt like a heavy weight I could never set down. One thing about my father was that he had an intense belief in competition. He believed that being average was shameful. If I brought home a 95 on a test, he would ask, "Who got 100?" And why wasn't it you? In sports, he pushed me to run faster, jump higher, and never show weakness. His philosophy was simple: either be first or be forgotten. While this drove me to succeed in many areas, it also created a deep fear of failure in me. I felt that if I failed, I would not only disappoint him but also dishonor Allah and our family. This pressure began shaping my personality. I became determined, disciplined, and obsessed with proving myself, but also fearful of making mistakes. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned to keep my emotions inside. My father didn't believe in showing weakness or sadness. If I was upset, he told me to pray and work harder. If I was tired, he told me to push through. This mindset would later help me in the most demanding challenges of my life, but it also made me feel alone. I wanted his approval, yet I often felt I could never fully please him. Still, I obeyed because I respected him and because in our culture, a son's duty is to honor his father. I didn't realize it then, but these early years, the strict discipline, the high expectations, and the unshakable Muslim identity my father gave me were shaping me for a path that would take me far from where I began. My decision to join the U.S. Navy SEALs came after years of hearing about elite soldiers who never gave up. It was not something I decided as a teenager. I had dreams of serving in the military, but my father insisted I focus on education first. After high school, I enrolled at a university in Los Angeles, majoring in mechanical engineering. My father believed a degree would guarantee respect in both America and among Iranians. I respected his wishes, but deep down I kept reading about the SEALs, watching documentaries about their training, and wondering if I had what it took. By my final year at 28, I knew I had one last opportunity before the age cutoff. If I wanted to chase this dream, it had to be now. I graduated, applied immediately, and began preparing for the hardest training in the U.S. military. When I told my father about my decision, his reaction was sharp. He did not object to the Navy, but he was firm about his expectations. He told me, "A Muslim son does not finish in the middle. You must be the best or you should not do it." I grew up knowing that failing in his eyes meant losing his respect. That pressure followed me everywhere, through school, sports, and now into the military. It was not about pride for myself. It was about meeting the high bar my father had set. I trained harder than ever before. I ran long distances every morning, swam daily, and did endless push-ups and pull-ups until my arms shook. By the time I left for Coronado, I was lean, strong, and more determined than ever. Arriving at Coronado, California, felt like stepping into a different world. The beach looked peaceful, but the atmosphere was tense. I was one of the older candidates at 29, surrounded by young men in their early 20s, many fresh from the Naval Academy or prior deployments. I knew my age could be seen as a weakness, so I worked to make it a strength. I had maturity, mental focus, and the discipline from years of education. On the first day, instructors made it clear, Bud/S was designed to break us. They did not care about our past achievements. Only performance here mattered. We would run miles on the sand, swim in freezing water, and carry boats on our heads until our necks ached. This was only the beginning. The first phase of Bud/S was all about endurance. We faced long runs, obstacle courses, and ocean swims in the cold Pacific. Our hands blistered, our feet bled, and our bodies ached constantly. Then came Hell Week, a 5.5-day test with only about 4 hours of sleep total. We were wet, cold, and miserable the entire time. I remember one night in particular when the wind cut through us like knives. We had to crawl through the sand with our rifles, push a heavy inflatable boat above our heads, then run into the ocean and back. Every step felt heavier than the last. I thought about quitting, but the idea of facing my father and telling him I failed was worse than any pain I felt. That thought kept me moving. Teamwork was at the heart of everything. In Bud/S, you learn quickly that your own success depends on the men beside you. If one man slowed down, the whole team suffered. We learned to carry each other, share burdens, and never leave anyone behind. The instructors looked for any sign of weakness. If they saw doubt in your eyes, they would push you harder. I began to notice that while I was not the fastest runner, I was consistent. I paced myself, kept my focus, and encouraged others. That made me valuable to my boat crew. My father's words about being the best were still in my mind, But I also learned here that sometimes being the best meant making sure your team crossed the line together. After 6 months, I moved on to SEAL Qualification Training, SQT. This 4-month phase was different, less about survival and more about mastering skills. We trained in weapons handling, demolitions, small unit tactics, and close quarters combat. We did advanced diving and learned how to operate in hostile environments. One of the most thrilling parts was parachute training. Jumping out of a plane for the first time was both terrifying and exciting. The instructors demanded precision. Every movement had to be calculated. There was no room for error. My age no longer felt like a disadvantage here. My education helped me understand technical skills faster, and my maturity kept me calm under pressure. The final weeks of SQT were intense. We conducted night missions, practiced boarding ships at sea, and learned survival techniques for when things went wrong. I started to feel the transformation, not just in my body but in my mind. The man who had entered Coronado months ago was not the same man now. I had pushed past limits I didn't know existed. My father called during those final days asking if I would graduate at the top. I told him honestly that I was not first, but I was among the best. Out of everyone who started, only about 20% made it through. I was proud to be in that small group. When I received my SEAL Trident, I felt a mix of pride, relief, and responsibility. I had achieved what I set out to do, and I had done it without quitting. The final week before my first deployment was filled with a quiet but strong sense of readiness. My team and I had trained for months together, and we were finally scheduled to head overseas. I had my gear packed neatly in my room, double-checking every piece of equipment to make sure nothing was missing. There was a sense of pride in wearing the uniform, knowing I had earned the Trident and could now serve with the most respected warriors in the U.S. Navy. Each morning, I still followed the same disciplined routine: early wake-up, physical training, and team briefings. I felt healthy, strong, and mentally prepared for whatever mission we would face. My mind was set on making a good first impression in the field. At this point in my life, I felt like nothing could stop me. I was wrong. 3 days before departure, I went to a local mart near the base to pick up a few personal items. It was a quick errand, and I was in a relaxed mood. I remember walking toward the store entrance, my mind already thinking about deployment and imagining how my first mission would go. Out of nowhere, I heard screeching tires. Before I could react, a vehicle came rushing toward me from the side. The impact was sudden and violent. I was thrown onto the pavement, pain shooting through my body before my mind could even process what happened. People shouted, and someone ran to my side telling me not to move. The driver looked shocked and kept saying it was an accident. All I could focus on was the unbearable pain in my right leg. I knew instantly something was badly wrong. An ambulance arrived within minutes. The paramedics carefully placed me on a stretcher, securing my neck and immobilizing my leg. I could hear the sirens as they rushed me to the hospital. The pain was intense, but what troubled me more was the thought that this might affect my deployment. In the emergency room, the doctors quickly ran x-rays. The results confirmed my fear. I had a fractured tibia in my right leg. The doctor explained that it was a clean break but would still require surgery and months of recovery. My heart sank. Deployment was no longer possible. The hospital admitted me immediately, and the surgical team worked on stabilizing my leg with metal rods and screws. Lying in that hospital bed, I felt the dream I had worked years for slipping away in a matter of seconds. The hospital stay was harder than I expected. For someone who was used to constant movement, the idea of staying in one place felt like punishment. Every day, nurses came in to check my vitals, change bandages, and remind me not to put any weight on the injured leg. My teammates visited me a few times, and while they were supportive, I could see in their eyes that they were moving forward without me. The military schedule waits for no one. I kept thinking about all the training, the sacrifices, the years of preparation, all interrupted by one unlucky moment outside a store. The physical pain was bad, but the mental strain of feeling left behind was worse. I tried to stay positive, telling myself I would heal and return stronger. Deep down, I feared the Navy might not wait. That fear became reality sooner than I thought. Just weeks after my surgery, I received official notice from the Navy Medical Board. They had decided to release me from active duty due to my injury and the long recovery time it required. I had not even started rehabilitation, and they were already making it clear that my position could not be held. The news hit me like another blow. I felt betrayed by a system I had dedicated myself to. I had passed some of the hardest training in the military, proven my physical and mental strength, and earned my place among the best. Yet one accident off duty was enough for them to send me home before I could prove myself in the field. It felt cold, almost mechanical, like I was just another name on a list they needed to clear. The day I was officially discharged was one of the lowest points of my life. Walking, or rather hobbling, out of the base with crutches in my hands felt like a walk of shame. I had imagined leaving the Navy one day as a decorated veteran, not as an injured man who never saw a mission. I carried my uniform in a bag, unsure whether to hang it in pride or hide it in the closet. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the Trident badge. It still represented everything I had accomplished, but it also felt like a reminder of what I had lost. I thought about the younger men I had trained with, now on deployment, doing the work I had dreamed of. It was hard not to feel like my chance had been stolen forever. When I told my father about the discharge, his reaction cut deep. He listened quietly at first, then asked me why the Navy could not wait for my recovery. I explained their policy and how operational readiness always came first. He did not accept it. Instead, he claimed it was discrimination because of our background, because I was Iranian-born and a Muslim by heritage. He said the Navy was looking for an excuse to remove me. His words stirred a different kind of anger inside me, not just toward the Navy but toward the whole situation. I did not want to believe my heritage played a role, but I could not deny that I had felt subtle differences in how some people treated me. Whether it was discrimination or simply the rules of the system, the result was the same: I was out. In the weeks that followed, my anger had no clear direction. I blamed myself for going to the mart that day, for not paying attention, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I blamed the driver for being careless. I blamed the Navy for cutting me loose when I was willing to fight through recovery. And I blamed my father for adding to my frustration instead of helping me heal emotionally. Every conversation with him circled back to accusations about America and unfair treatment. I was caught between his beliefs and my own desire to believe in the country I had worked so hard to serve. Recovery from the leg injury was slow, but recovery from the disappointment was even slower. The Navy had been my identity, my future, and my pride. Now I was just a man with a damaged leg in no direction. The anger that had grown inside me during recovery never left. The bitterness kept eating at me, and the idea that I had been betrayed began to take hold. The more I thought about it, the more I felt I had no real place in America anymore. That was when the thought of leaving for good started to feel like the only path left. I told my father I was considering going back to Iran. His reaction was immediate. He supported it fully. He spoke about reconnecting with our heritage, with people who understood us, and with a system that would value my skills. At first, I thought he meant a quiet life, maybe teaching or finding work unrelated to the military. But in his tone, there was something heavier, almost like he had already imagined my role there. I had not been to Iran since I was a child, but the idea of returning felt strangely comforting. It would mean stepping away from a country that had rejected me and proving to myself that I could still have a purpose. Within weeks, I sold most of my belongings, packed what I could, and boarded a flight out of the United States, leaving behind the life I had fought to build. Arriving in Tehran was overwhelming. The air felt different, the streets alive with a rhythm I had almost forgotten. My father had arranged for distant relatives to meet me. They welcomed me warmly, though I sensed their curiosity about my time in the US and my service as a Navy SEAL. It wasn't long before one of them introduced me to a man who claimed to work in security operations for the government. At first, our conversations were casual. He asked about my skills, my training, and what life was like inside the US military. I kept my answers vague, but he was patient. Over time, it became clear that his interest was not in friendship. It was in what I could offer the regime. He spoke with pride about defending Iran and resisting Western influence, planting seeds that began to grow in my mind. One day he invited me to meet a group of men by the coast. They were not part of the regular military but operated under the protection of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They specialized in naval operations, fast attack boats, coastal defense, and unconventional tactics at sea. From the moment I saw them train, I knew they were no ordinary sailors. They worked in secrecy, away from public eyes, and their loyalty to the regime was absolute. My contact explained that they needed someone with my level of expertise, especially in maritime combat and boarding operations. The idea that my SEAL training could still be used stirred something inside me. It felt like a second chance to matter again, even if it meant standing on the opposite side of the line I once defended. My formal recruitment into the jihadist naval group was quick. They didn't ask for loyalty at first, they asked for results. They wanted to see if my skills were real. Within days, I was on a small training vessel, demonstrating how to approach and board larger ships at high speed. They were impressed with my precision, my ability to operate under pressure, and my understanding of U.S. tactics. The irony was not lost on me. Just months earlier, I had been preparing to use these skills to defend American interests. Now, I was being asked to use them against those same forces. The shift in allegiance was unsettling, but the praise I received drowned out any doubts. I told myself I was doing what was necessary to survive in this new reality. The first time I took part in an actual mission for the group, it was a nighttime operation in the Persian Gulf. We were tasked with intercepting a vessel suspected of carrying equipment for Western allies. My role was to lead the boarding team. As we approached in silence, I felt the same adrenaline rush I had during SEAL training. Everything I had learned, the hand signals, the timing, the movement, came back naturally. We boarded quickly, secured the crew, and searched the cargo. I did my job without hesitation, but deep inside, I knew this was no longer about protecting innocent lives. It was about furthering a cause I didn't fully understand but had chosen to serve. The mission was considered a success, and from that day my place in the group was sealed. Life as part of the jihad movement was unlike anything I had known before. Discipline was strict, but it came with a sense of belonging I had missed since leaving the Navy. We operated in small units, each with its own leader, and reported directly to commanders tied to the regime. The ideology was ever present. Every meeting began with speeches about resisting the West, defending Islam, and sacrificing for the greater good. At first, I ignored the religious rhetoric, focusing only on the tactical side of the work. But over time, I began to absorb it, if only to avoid standing out. The men around me saw themselves as warriors in a holy struggle. They believed every action, no matter how aggressive, was justified in the name of their mission. I learned to blend in, to speak their language, and to hide whatever doubts I still carried. We spent long stretches patrolling the waters, monitoring foreign vessels, and training for rapid response. Some days we worked on boarding drills. Other days we studied maps, learning every inch of the coastline and every possible escape route. My SEAL background made me valuable not only in physical operations but in planning. I could predict how a U.S. patrol might respond, how fast they could deploy, and what weaknesses they might have. This knowledge made me a trusted asset, but it also made me a target for constant testing. The group leaders wanted to be sure I was committed, that I would never betray them. Each successful mission tightened their grip on me, making it harder to imagine walking away. Despite the sense of purpose, I knew my life had changed in ways I could never reverse. I was no longer the man who had once dreamed of serving America. I had crossed a line and there was no going back. The regime saw me as proof that even the most elite U.S. soldiers could turn against their own country. They used my story in private circles, presenting me as a symbol of betrayal against the West. I told myself I was simply adapting, surviving, and finding value where I could. But deep inside, I knew I had become exactly what my former comrades would now call an enemy. At the time, I didn't care. I thought I had found a place where I belonged. I had no idea how quickly that illusion would be shattered in the years to come. The mission that changed my life began like many others. We were patrolling near a disputed maritime border, shadowing foreign vessels and waiting for orders. The sea was calm, but the tension was high. Intelligence had suggested unusual activity in the area, and our commander believed there might be a hidden shipment moving under the protection of Western forces. My job was to lead a small boarding team if we spotted anything suspicious. As we moved between the waves, the faint hum of another engine reached my ears. I signaled to cut our motor. Silence filled the air. Then, out of the darkness, tracer rounds lit up the night. We had sailed straight into an ambush. Bullets ripped through the water around us. My instincts took over. I grabbed my rifle, shouted orders, and tried to push the team into cover. But before I could move, 3 rounds tore into my chest and side. The pain was instant and overwhelming, but my training told me to keep fighting. My weapon slipped from my grip as my vision blurred. Warm blood soaked through my clothes. Each breath felt heavier than the last. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the deck, hearing only muffled voices and the roar of gunfire. The world began to fade as though someone was slowly dimming the lights. I remember staring up at the night sky, seeing stars through the smoke, and realizing I might not survive. My body felt weightless, as if the pull of the earth was letting go. The sounds around me grew distant, then vanished completely. My last thought before everything went black was not of anger, not of victory, but of a strange, deep regret. When I opened my eyes, the sea was gone. I was standing in a place so bright I couldn't tell where the light came from. It was not like sunlight, and yet it lit everything perfectly. The air felt pure, the kind of purity I had never experienced before. There was no pain in my chest, no weight in my body. I looked at my hands, clean, unscarred, whole. In the distance, I saw what looked like a great city, shining like gold yet more beautiful than anything I had seen on earth. Music filled the air, but it wasn't coming from instruments. It seemed to flow from the very ground and sky, a harmony that touched something deep in my soul. I knew without anyone telling me that I was in heaven. As I walked forward, I noticed people ahead of me, countless people, clothed in white, their faces filled with peace. Some were laughing, some singing, others kneeling in silent reverence. None of them looked worried or tired. A sense of perfect love surrounded everything. I had never believed much in God, even when the group I worked for spoke of him. But here, belief was no longer a choice. The truth of his existence was all around me, undeniable and living. My heart felt lighter than ever before. For the first time in years, I felt no hatred, no fear, no suspicion, only peace. Then I saw him. He stood ahead, taller than I expected, his face unlike any face I had ever seen, yet somehow familiar. His eyes drew me in, eyes that seemed to see every moment of my life, the good and the bad, and still hold nothing but love. His presence was overwhelming, yet I felt no fear. I knew instantly that this was Jesus. His clothes were radiant, yet simple, and light seemed to flow from him, not just around him. I wanted to fall to my knees, but I couldn't move, as if every part of me was fixed on him alone. When he spoke, it was not with sound, yet I heard him clearly inside me. He called me by my name. The sound of it in his voice was unlike anything I had known. It carried warmth, authority, and forgiveness all at once. He told me he had known me from the moment I was formed, that he had watched every step I had taken, even the darkest ones. He did not list my sins like an accusation, but I saw them in my mind. The lives taken, the missions carried out without mercy, the hatred I had allowed to grow in my heart. I wanted to look away in shame, but his gaze held me. Then he told me something that shook me to my core. He loved me even in my rebellion, and he had a purpose for me that I had not yet fulfilled. Suddenly, he raised his hand and the scene around us shifted. I was no longer standing in the light, but watching a place of unimaginable darkness. The air was thick and suffocating, filled with screams and the stench of burning. Shapes moved in the shadows, twisted and tormented. I saw men I recognized, men who had led wars, planned attacks, and ordered killings. They were crying out in agony, but there was no escape. I understood immediately, this was hell. And these were war makers, those who had destroyed lives for power and hate. The fear that gripped me was unlike any fear I had felt in battle. This was not just pain, it was separation from every trace of goodness forever. Before I could speak, the scene changed again. I was now looking at a place filled with peace and light, like the first place I had arrived in. Here people moved with joy and purpose. There was no division, no fighting, no suffering. I saw faces of people who had brought life instead of death, who had chosen mercy over violence. Jesus called them peacemakers. He said they would always live here in his presence because they had chosen to follow his way. The contrast between the two places burned into my mind. I understood then that the path I had walked on earth was leading me toward the first place, not the second. Jesus turned to me again. He said my time was not yet over, that I had been spared to return and make amends for what I had done. He told me I would face many trials, that the path back would not be easy, but that I would not be alone. His presence would go with me, and if I trusted him, my life would no longer be in service to destruction but to healing. Then he reached out his hand. When I touched it, I felt a surge of love and power unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was as if my soul was being remade, every wound healed, every chain broken. The light around me grew brighter until I could see nothing else. When my eyes opened again, the sea and gunfire were gone. I was lying in a hospital bed, the beeping of machines and the sharp smell of disinfectant filling the air. My chest was wrapped tightly, and every breath sent a wave of pain through my body. A nurse in a plain headscarf moved around the room, checking my IV. Through the window, I could see a familiar skyline. It took me a moment to realize where I was. I was in Iran. I had no memory of how I got there after the ambush. All I knew was that my body had been pulled from death and my heart felt different. The encounter with Jesus was still vivid in my mind. As I lay there, I whispered words I had never spoken before. Jesus, my life is yours now. Forgive me. Lead me. I meant every word. My old life was over. Once I was strong enough to walk, I returned to my small apartment. But the city I had known for years now looked different. I saw the streets, the shops, and the mosques, but my heart no longer belonged to this world. I began reading a small Bible that a foreign sailor had once given me long ago, one I had hidden and ignored. Every page felt alive. The words spoke to my soul, showing me a God of love and truth I had never known. I couldn't keep this to myself. The peace I had found in Jesus was too great. I started speaking to close friends first, telling them how I had died and met him. Some listened with quiet interest. Others warned me to stop before trouble came. But I knew I could not go back. It didn't take long before the wrong ears heard my words. One evening, as I returned from meeting a friend, two men stepped from the shadows. They wore plain clothes, but the way they carried themselves told me they were from the intelligence service. Without explanation, they pushed me into the back of a van. My hands were bound and a cloth was tied over my eyes. Hours later, I found myself in a bare interrogation room. The man across from me asked one question after another. Why was I speaking against the Prophet Muhammad? Who was paying me to spread Christianity? Each time I answered that I had met Jesus and was speaking the truth of what I saw, his face grew darker. By the next morning, I was charged with blasphemy, a crime punishable by death in my country. They moved me to a small cell in the prison's death row wing. The air was damp and heavy with the smell of mold. My cellmate, an older man with sunken eyes, said nothing for days. I lay awake at night listening to the distant clanging of iron doors and the cries of men who knew they would never see freedom again. The thought of death no longer terrified me like it once did. I had seen heaven. But my heart was heavy knowing my time to share the message might end here. Still I prayed. I prayed for my family, for the friends who had heard my testimony, and even for the men who had arrested me. When the guard told me I would be hanged in 2 weeks, I felt a deep calm. My life was in God's hands. It was then that something unexpected happened. One of the guards began lingering outside my cell, speaking in low tones when no one else was around. His name was Reza. He was tall, with kind eyes that betrayed the hardness of his uniform. One night, when the hallway was quiet, he leaned close to the bars and whispered, "I am a follower of Jesus too." My heart leapt. He told me he had come to faith years earlier through a satellite gospel broadcast. No one knew, not his family, not his superiors. Yet here he was, guarding me, a man sentenced to die for the same faith. We prayed together in whispers, sharing scripture verses from memory. It was the first time since my arrest that I felt true fellowship again. Reza knew my execution date was near. He told me he had been praying for days, asking God for a way to save me. I didn't expect a miracle. I was ready to meet Jesus again if it came to that. But on the night before I was to be taken to the gallows, Reza came to my cell in the early hours. His voice was steady, but his eyes were filled with something I could not yet understand. He unlocked the door and handed me a prison uniform belonging to another inmate. "Put this on," he said. "Walk down the hall, take the left staircase, and keep going until you reach the back gate. Don't look back." My hands trembled. "What about you?" I asked. He gave a faint smile and said, "This is my part in his plan." I followed his instructions, my heart pounding with each step. The corridor was dim, the only sound was my own breathing. When I reached the gate, another guard was waiting. He glanced at me but said nothing, opening the door to the night outside. I walked quickly into the darkness until I was far from the prison walls. The air felt different, like freedom had weight. Hours later, I learned the truth. Reza had taken my place. The authorities believed he was escorting me to the gallows, but when they found out, it was too late. He had stood in front of them, claiming he was me, and paid the price with his own life. His sacrifice broke me in ways nothing else had. I never saw Reza again on this earth, but his face remains with me. He had known the risk and chosen to give his life so I could live and continue the mission Jesus had given me. From that day forward, I carried not only my testimony but also his. He had shown me the meaning of Jesus' words, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." I left Iran with nothing but the clothes on my back and the message in my heart. I knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but there was no turning back. Reza's courage had given me the freedom to speak, and I would not waste it. My life was no longer mine. It belonged to the one who had saved me twice. The journey out of Iran was not easy. I had no passport, no official papers, and no money. My escape depended on the kindness of strangers and the quiet guidance of believers who worked in secret. A small group of Christians connected through underground networks took me in, hiding me in their homes for days at a time. Each night, we moved closer to the border. I slept in barns, sheds, and sometimes under the open sky. The fear of being caught was constant, but so was my sense of God's presence. Finally, under the cover of darkness, we crossed a narrow mountain path into Armenia. The cold air hit my face as we stepped onto new soil. I knelt there for a moment, thanking God for delivering me from certain death. The freedom felt strange at first, but I knew it was a gift bought with another man's life. Life in Armenia began quietly. I stayed with a local family who had connections to a small Christian fellowship in the capital. They welcomed me as a brother, feeding me, giving me clothes, and helping me find my place in their community. My first weeks were spent resting and regaining my strength. The scars on my body from both the ambush and the prison were a constant reminder of the road I had walked. But my spirit was stronger than ever. Soon, I began meeting with new believers who had left Islam or other faiths to follow Jesus. Many of them faced rejection from their families and threats from neighbors. I knew their pain, and they knew I understood without many words. We prayed together, studied the Bible, and encouraged one another to stand firm. My survival was no accident. God had brought me here to build up others. The work grew quickly. Every week, more people came to our gatherings. Some were curious seekers. Others had already made the decision to follow Christ but needed support to stay strong. I began traveling to small villages where believers met in secret. We shared meals, sang songs quietly so as not to draw attention, and read scripture by candlelight. I taught them from the stories of the early church, reminding them that persecution was not new and that faith could grow even in the darkest times. Each testimony I heard reminded me of God's mercy. It was clear that the same Jesus who had saved me on that battlefield and in that prison was still working here, changing lives one by one. Yet, even in freedom, my thoughts often returned to Reza. His face would appear in my mind during moments of quiet prayer. I remembered his voice, steady yet filled with love, as he told me to walk out of that prison. His choice had given me this new life. Sometimes the weight of it was overwhelming. Why had God spared me and taken him instead? I would never know the full answer, but I knew one thing. Reza had understood the heart of Christ. He had lived the words he believed. His sacrifice was not in vain, because every person I reached now was part of his legacy too. The memory of him pushed me to keep going when I felt tired or afraid. In Armenia, I also began speaking to small groups about my journey. I did not hide the dangers or the cost of following Jesus. I told them openly about the prison, the death sentence, and the night Reza saved me. Tears often filled the eyes of those listening. Some were encouraged to share their own faith more boldly, even if it meant risk. Others realized they had been silent for too long and decided to speak. I reminded them that following Christ is not about comfort but about obedience. My own comfort had been taken from me many times, yet my joy had only grown. The more I gave my life away for others, the more I felt alive. There were moments when fear tried to creep back in. Sometimes I heard rumors that agents from my home country were operating in Armenia, looking for defectors and converts. I learned to move carefully, changing my routes and avoiding public exposure. But I refused to let fear silence me. I had been spared twice by God, once from death in combat, once from death in prison. I could not waste that mercy by hiding. Each day I woke up, I asked God for one thing: to be faithful until my last breath, whether that was in Armenia or somewhere else He would send me. The mission was not mine to control. It was His. As the months passed, I saw real growth in the people I served. Some of the young believers I had first met timid and unsure were now leading small Bible groups of their own. Families began opening their homes for prayer meetings. People who had once been afraid to be seen with a Bible were now carrying them openly in certain towns. The changes were slow and often unnoticed by outsiders, but they were real. It reminded me that the kingdom of God does not always move with loud voices and bright lights. It often spreads quietly, heart to heart, life to life. And in that quiet work, I saw God's power more clearly than I had in any battle. At night, when I lay in bed, I would think about how far God had brought me. From a man chasing the pride of being a Navy SEAL, to a soldier who killed without thinking, to a prisoner ready to die, and now to a servant in a small country I had never imagined living in. The road was nothing like I had planned, yet it was exactly where I was meant to be. I thought often of the verse that says, "He who loses his life for my sake will find it." I had lost my old life completely, and in return, God had given me something far greater. A life worth living, one that carried eternal weight. I made a personal vow in Armenia, one that I wrote down and kept in my Bible. It was simple but unshakable: I will live for Christ no matter the cost. This was not a promise to be kept only when life felt safe or the path was clear. It was a promise for the dark nights, for the threats, for the times when friends might betray me, and even for the day when my own life might be demanded again. I knew that following Jesus meant my story could end like races at any moment. But I also knew that death is not the end for those who belong to Him. That truth had set me free and nothing could take it away. In the end, Armenia became more than a place of refuge. It became a place of calling. Every person I met, every prayer I prayed, every tear I shed for those still trapped in fear reminded me that my mission was far from over. I had escaped Iran with only my life, but here I had found a new purpose. I would preach, teach, encourage, and serve for as many days as God allowed. And when my time came, I hoped to meet Reza again in that place of peace I had once seen, both of us smiling at the work that had been done, not by our strength but by the one who had called us both. As I sit here in Armenia, far from the life I once knew, my heart is heavy for two groups of people. First, for Christians who have the freedom to worship but sometimes take that freedom for granted. Second, for my Muslim brothers and sisters, who live every day under the shadow of religion but without the truth that can set them free. This is why I want to end my story with a call that is more important than anything else I have shared. This is not about me. This is about Jesus Christ, His kingdom, and the eternal destiny of every soul who hears my voice. I speak first to my fellow Christians, especially those living in countries where you can carry a Bible without fear, attend church openly, and talk about Jesus without the police coming to your door. My brothers and sisters, do not take your faith lightly. The Bible says in Philippians 2 verse 12, "Continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling." This means you must treat your relationship with God as the most serious thing in your life. It is not a Sunday routine or a cultural identity. It is life and death. I have met men and women in Muslim countries who are ready to lose everything for Jesus. Their jobs, their families, and even their lives, because they know He is worth more than the whole world. What excuse will we have if we live in safety yet waste our days chasing comfort instead of Christ? I ask you to remember the family of Reza, the Christian prison guard who gave his life to set me free. His children are growing up without their father because he believed in Jesus more than his own safety. Hebrews 13 verse 3 tells us, "Remember those in prison as if you were together with them, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering." That is not a suggestion. It is a command. Pray for them. Pray for the secret believers in Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and across the Muslim world. Pray for those who are meeting in hidden house churches, whispering hymns because they cannot sing loud. Your prayers are not small. They move the hand of God. Now I speak to my Muslim friends. I was born in Tehran, raised to pray to Allah, to follow the teachings of Islam, to obey the Imam, and to believe that Muhammad was the seal of the prophets. But I found no peace in my prayers, no forgiveness in my fasting, and no hope in my works. The Quran told me to fear the day of judgment, but it never gave me a way to be sure that my sins were forgiven. My heart was heavy until the day I met Jesus. He did not come to me with condemnation. He came with love, with pierced hands that paid for my sins. He said in Matthew 11 verse 28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I found that rest. I want you to find it too. To my Muslim brothers and sisters, I know the cost of what I am saying. I know that to follow Jesus, you may lose your family, your community, even your life. But I promise you this, what you will gain is greater than anything you can lose. Jesus said in Mark 8 verse 36, "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul?" Your soul matters more than your reputation, your position, or even your safety. In Islam, you are told to try your best and hope for mercy. In Christ, mercy is already given through his sacrifice on the cross. This is not betrayal of your culture. It is salvation for your soul. If you are hearing this and your heart is stirring, I want to invite you to pray to Jesus now. You do not need to know every detail of the Bible to begin. You only need to know that you are a sinner, that he died for you, and that he rose again to give you eternal life. Romans 10 verse 9 says, "If you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." Speak to him in your own words. Call on his name. He will hear you whether you are in a mosque, a church, or a prison cell. Finally, to all who follow Jesus already, I leave you with this truth. The gospel is not safe. It will take you to dangerous places, to uncomfortable conversations, to sacrifices that may cost you more than you plan to give. But it is worth it. Jesus is worth it. In Revelation 12 verse 11, it says of the faithful, "They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death." That is the kind of faith we are called to live. A faith that trembles before God, that stands firm under pressure, and that refuses to be silent in a world that needs the truth. So I ask you, pray as if lives depend on it, because they do. Give as if eternity depends on it, because it does. And speak as if the next words you say could change someone's destiny forever. Because one day, whether you are in America, Iran, or Armenia, you will stand before Jesus. On that day, you will want to hear the words he promised to those who are faithful. "Well done, good and faithful servant." Until then, live every day as if it is your last chance to serve him. Because for someone else it might be.